I will, for all of you, I'm just delighted to welcome and introduce my dear friend Steve Kleinberg, who's been my colleague and at the Baker Institute, I say Baker Institute a lot now, in the sociology department at Rice, and he's going to talk about Houston. If you've read what was in the newsletter, you know that what started as a social research research methods
class
assignment 40 years ago, 39 years ago, now has morphed into a continuing study of Houston that is unmatched in any other city in America, and I guess probably anywhere in the world. Steve has become famous, justly famous, deservedly famous, for being able to carry this on. To now it has morphed into the Kinder Institute, which you read about regularly in the newspaper, and you just recognize that all started with Steve Kleinberg's social research methods class 40 years ago. He's one of the best known people in Houston and one of the best teachers at Rice or anywhere else. So welcome you to, and a delightful person and a dear friend. So it's an honor to have you here, Steve. Welcome, and let you go ahead and amaze us.
Okay. No pressure here.
No pressure.
Thank you, Bill. Can I share my screen? Is this going to work?
You should be able to share your screen, no problem.
Do I hit share screen over here?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, beautiful. See if this works.
I wish you'd look.
So you guys can see this now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So
We can see all of them.
you made a big mistake by inviting someone here to talk to you who's just written a book. So I could talk hours about the findings in these surveys. We did a one-time survey back in 1982, as Bill was saying. It fell to my lot. We were taking turns to teach a research methods class to sociology majors at Rice. Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved into Harris County between 1970 and 1982, coming at the rate of 1,380 people a week. 230 cars and trucks every day being added to the streets and freeways of Harris County, greatest boom anyone had ever seen, brought about by the tenfold increase in the value of oil. This was a company town. 82% of all the jobs in Houston in 1980 were tied into the price of oil. Price of oil was at $3.20 per barrel in 1970 to 10, 15, 20, 25, 35. We were building and borrowing on the basis of $50 oil. Suddenly the price of oil fell down to $28 by the end of 1983, and 100,000 jobs were lost in the city. We said, my God, we better do this survey again. And for now 40 years, 39 years, taking a representative random sample of Harris County residents reached by random telephone numbers, 50% landline, 50% cell phone, asking people with identical questions over the years, how do you see the world? What is happening in your life? And we have sat back and watched the world change. Houston went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom, and then recovered into a restructured economy and a demographic revolution. These are the changes occurring across. Let's see if I can get this to open up. Whoops. There we go. Three great themes that have emerged from these years. I want to touch on each one of them as briefly as I can. One is suddenly a new kind of economy where the source of wealth has less to do with natural resources and more to do with human resources, growing inequalities, predicated above all else on access to quality education. A strong right arm and a willingness to work hard will not get you a decent job in the new economy of the 21st century. A truly epic transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Why here, why now? And a new awareness that if Houston's gonna make it, it has to turn itself into a destination of choice, a place where the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere will say, I wanna live in Houston, Texas. So without anyone expecting this, Houston has turned out to be, I think, one of the most interesting and consequential cities in America, at the forefront of the transformations that are occurring across all of the country. So here we go. So the new economy. Here is the 30 years after World War II. The United States emerged out of that war in 1945, the sole economic power on the planet. All of our potential competitors were decimated by the war experience. This was a time of big government, big business, big labor, 38% of all the jobs in America were union jobs. The unions could negotiate with the corporations to ensure that workers shared in the prosperity of the companies, and the rising tide lifted all boats. The poorest, least educated 20% of American men literally doubled their incomes in real terms between 1950 and 1970. And those were the years when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. The average American woman between 1946 and 1964 gave birth to 3.6 children on average, and the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generations. So for 60 years, there's been a bulge going through the American system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python. Not very comfortable either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies, overwhelmingly Anglo babies, because that's who was here to be born in that period after World War II. The leading edge of those 76 million turns 74 this year. And we are going to watch a literal doubling of the number of Americans over the age of 65 every day, believe it or not, between now and 2030. Day after day, 10,000 Americans will turn 65. And by 2030, the youngest of those 76 million will have turned 65, heading off eventually into the proverbial wilderness, being replaced by a very different generation of Americans. It's a truly epic transformation that has transformed America in the 21st century in powerful and consequential ways. This is the 30 years after World War II, the rising tide lifting all boats. Here is the last 35 years. Actually, all the benefits of economic growth have gone to the richest 20%, most of that to the richest 5%, most of that to the richest 1%. The bottom 60% of American households whose incomes had doubled in the 30 years before 1980 are now find their income stagnating or going down. A radical redistribution of earnings out of the hands of the poor and the middle class into the hands of the rich and the super rich, and a truly remarkable growth of inequality. Why has the economy changed so profoundly? What happened? Two big things happened, and then a total failure for the last 40 years of the American economic and political system to address the issues and ensure that people are prepared to succeed in this new economy. The new economy brought about by two big things. Number one, globalization. Companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you are doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, and I pay that third world worker $15 a day to do that job, I'm not going to pay you $15 an hour. And if you are doing a job that I can program a computer to do, or at the beginnings of the robotics revolution, I'm going to replace your job with an intelligent machine. We are in a new world where education, always a nice thing to have, has become absolutely essential to a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century. Here's one piece of evidence for this. This is an analysis by the Georgetown University Center on Education. In 1973, there were 91 million jobs in America. Of those 91 million jobs, 1/3 you were eligible for as a high school dropout. Another 40% required no more than high school. 75% of all the jobs that existed in America in the 1970s required high school or less. Here's what's happened to American jobs. And by 2020, by the end of this year, the projection is that 65% of all the jobs that will exist in America will require education beyond high school. Not necessarily 4 years of college, but 1 or 2 years in a community college to acquire the technical skills that connect you to the jobs of the 21st century. Houston is facing a major shortage of skilled welders, skilled electricians, skilled health technicians. You don't necessarily need 4 years of college, but 14 years of education is now the minimum requirement to succeed. You come out of high school, you come out into the workforce today with no more than a high school diploma, and you don't have special skills as an artist or a performer or an athlete, and you just say, put me to work, America, and you have a high school diploma and no more, you're not going to find a job. And if you find a job, it will not pay you enough to support a family. Education, always a nice thing to have, has become absolutely essential. Here's some signs of growing understanding of this in the broader public. Here's one of the surprising findings. We asked this question back starting in 1995. Which comes closest to your opinion about the public schools in Houston? The schools have enough money, if it was used wisely, to provide a quality education, or in order for the schools to provide a quality education, significantly more money will be needed. During the 1990s, if the money was used wisely, we've got all the money we need to have quality education, 55 to 37%. Then during the first decade of the 21st century, it was a 50-50 split. We sort of stopped asking the question, figured, okay, they're not changing. We came back 10 years later, and in 2018 in the survey, 55% now said the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. And it was 55% to 39% in the 2020 survey this year. A sea change. The general public understands the critical importance of education and the inadequacy of our funding for education. One of the stories in Houston and Texas is that we are at the bottom of our spending on education, mainly because you didn't need education to make money in Texas. The big Texas fortunes were made from land, exploiting all the things you could do on the land: cotton, timber, cattle, sugar, oil. The source of wealth in the 21st century, we now more and more recognize, has less to do with natural resources and more to do, as I say, with human resources, with technical skills and theoretical knowledge that only good education can provide. Here's one other sea change that surprised us in the 2018 survey. We asked for the first time, are you in favor of opposed to increasing local taxes in order to provide universal preschool education for all children in Houston? You start a question with increasing local taxes. No, stop. And to our surprise in 2018, 67% of Houstonians said, I'm in favor of increasing local taxes to provide universal preschool education. We came back 2 years later, and it was now 70% to 28%. A striking understanding, right? One of the moments of truth in education is third grade reading. If you're not reading at the third grade level in third grade, you are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And the single most powerful predictor whether you can read at third grade level is, did you start kindergarten ready to learn to read? The brain is growing by 40% between birth and age 4. This is when all the synapses are forming. The best return on investment you can get is in investing in early childhood education. Rich kids in Houston start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids. And that gap continues to increase. Houston is behind Dallas and San Antonio in the percentage of poor kids who have access to quality preschool education. It is maybe the single most important investment we can make, and the general public is remarkably in support of that in a way that they would not have been 10 or 15 years ago. So those inequalities predicated on education have become palpable in Houston, and particularly clear with this pandemic, the deep vulnerabilities of African Americans and Latinos compared to Anglos and Asians. But here's just a few examples. We asked a question last year that said, suppose you had an emergency expense and had to come up with $400. How would you deal with that situation? Would you be able to pay for that $400 out of savings? Would you need to borrow it? Or would you not be able to come up with $400 to meet an emergency expense? And 39% of the people participating in the survey said they could not come up with $400. Another example, Houston has the greatest medical complex in the world, and the Texas Medical Center, largest medical complexes on earth, 49 different institutions, 100,000 people working there, great medical interventions. Houston has the greatest medical complex in the world, and Houston has the highest percentage of children without health insurance of any major city in America. 1/4 of all the people participating in the survey this year said they and their family and children had no health insurance whatsoever. 1/3 were living on household incomes of less than $37,000. 35% had problems paying for groceries in the past year. Another 35% previously said they had problems paying for housing to support their families. The growing inequalities that increasingly the public understands are not due to laziness or to people not willing to work hard, but due to structural inequalities, barriers to success that need to be addressed. And here's another set of questions we've asked over the years about programs to reduce the inequalities in America. And I tell people, don't blame me, I'm just asking the questions. Here are the answers that we're getting in a consistent way, a series of questions over these years. You agree or disagree, government should take action to reduce income differences between rich and poor in America, went from 45% to 61% in the survey this year. Do you agree or disagree, government should see to it that everyone who wants to work can find a job, 64 to 79% in 2020. Do you think most people who are receiving welfare benefits are really in need of help, or are they taking advantage of the system? The percent saying they're really in need of help went from 31 to 47%. And one last thing, you favor post of federal health insurance to cover the medical costs of all Americans from 60% to 72%. Not dramatic, but unmistakable, consistent, growing understanding that this is the central challenge of our times, how to reduce the inequalities, increase the opportunities to ensure that most Americans can share in the prosperity of the country. Theme number one, growing inequalities predicated above all else on access to quality education. Theme number two is truly remarkable, fundamental, irreversible transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Why here? Why now? Why is this happening? Here's a quick history lesson. This is the number of documented immigrants coming to America in each of the decades from the 1820s to 2010. Everybody able to see this here? See if I can move. There we go. Oops, sorry. Wait, I didn't want to, how did I get over here? Okay. The big story of our lifetimes is between 1492 and 1965. 82% of all the human beings on the face of this earth who came to American shores, 82% of us came from Europe. Another 12% were Africans originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation was an amalgam of European nationalities, deliberately so. We were operating under the last 40 years of that period, between 1924 and 1965, under one of the most viciously racist laws the US Congress ever passed, the National Origins Quota Act. And it came out of the great anti-immigrant racist backlash that accompanied the last great wave of immigration when 15.9 million immigrants came to America between 1890 and 1914. 15.9 coming from Europe, but not coming from Northern Europe. They were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews. And they had no history of democracy to come and take our jobs and destroy our country. And in 1924, we enacted this incredible act that said, from now on, only Northern Europeans will be allowed to come to America. The act used the new science of psychology and the IQ test to declare in the act, science has proven that there are 3 subspecies of the white race. The Nordics, who are biologically and intellectually superior to the Alpines, who in turn are superior to the Mediterraneans, and all of them are superior to the Jews and the Asians. And the law codified the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 in California, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan of 1906, to declare in the Act of 1924, Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, and Asians were banned entirely from coming to America. The law of the land through the 20s, 30s, 40s. You can see what happens to immigration. It plummets. That's, of course, the Great Depression, the 1930s, followed by World War II, the terrible aftermath of World War II. We thought immigration had ended, that racist law could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements, Jack Kennedy's assassination. Kennedy was one of the great champions of immigration. Last book published after he was assassinated was entitled A Nation of Immigrants, a celebration of how much immigration had brought to this country. And partly in tribute to him, in 1965, Congress changed the law, thinking nothing would change. We're just going to get rid of this racist law. But immigration has basically ended, and if it hasn't, we're going to emphasize family reunification. If you're the father, mother, sister, brother, son or daughter of an American citizen, you can come to the head of the line. Therefore, said Congress, we think immigration has ended, but if it hasn't, we're going to give preference to people already here, so nothing will change. Then it added another provision. It said, well, if you're a professional of exceptional ability, or if your skills that are demonstrably needed in short supply, you too can come to the head of the line. And Congress in its debates was saying, we need to open the door for some more British doctors, some more German engineers. It never occurred to anyone that there were going to be African doctors, Indian engineers, Chinese computer programmers, Filipino nurses who would be able for the first time in the 20th century to come to America. The law was changed in 1965. It's been called one of the great inadvertent acts in a body known for its inadvertent acts and its unintended consequences. We thought nothing would change. Everything changed. During the 1960s, 3.5 million immigrants came to America. Only 38% were from Europe. 1970s, 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, 10 million immigrants per decade have been coming to America. 88% coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And the United States, and throughout all of our history, had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in the history of the world that can say, we are a free people and we come from everywhere. It's a truly remarkable, having the same moment as the American economy is becoming fully integrated into a single global world economic system, America now a microcosm of the world. Immigration, of course, is network driven, so it's not happening at the same rate everywhere. Here is New York City, in terms of sheer numbers, obviously the great immigration capital of America, followed by Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, followed right after Chicago by Houston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and then San Diego, Dallas, Boston, Atlanta, spreading out to every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. This city, throughout all of our history, was essentially a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken for granted way by white men. In the space of the last 35 years, has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the entire country. Here are the census figures. In 1960, there were 1.243 million of us living in Harris County, Texas. This was still our biracial world. 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, 6% Hispanics, less than 0.5% were Asians. During the 60s and 70s, it was Anglos pouring into Houston from everywhere else in the country. This is while the oil boom was going, we were booming, while the rest of you guys up in the Northeast are having your Carter Malez, your stagflating 70s. And by 1980, Houston had become the fourth largest city in America, still an overwhelmingly Anglo city. After the oil bust of 1982, the Anglo population of Harris County stopped growing. And all the growth of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. Here are the last 3 completed censuses. The Anglo population stabilizes after 1980 and then declines slightly. African American population is growing by about 20% per decade, keeping pace with the population as a whole, fueled by African and Jamaican immigration, fueled by the great remigration of middle-class African Americans who had gone to northern cities in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, coming back to southern cities, Atlanta first, Houston second. African American population keeping pace, and surging populations of Latinos and Asians. And the most recent census estimates are that Harris County is now 42% Hispanic, 19% African American, 31% Anglo, 8.5% Asian. No city has been transformed as rapidly as Houston, Texas. Just imagine how different the story of Houston would have been had we not become one of the great magnets for the new immigration of the last 35 years. Houston would have lost population. We would have had the same fate as other major American cities across the country that are losing their status as major cities because for 35 years they have stopped growing. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo. Instead, Houston is one of the most vibrant, rapidly growing cities in America with a tremendous entrepreneurial economy. Last city to go into recession, first one to come out, purely because of the tremendous energy, vitality, commitment to hard work of immigrants pouring into the city from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. No city has benefited more from immigration than Houston, Texas. And it's ironic, but I guess not surprising to see anti-immigrant attitudes in Houston when you think how different the story of Houston would have been had we been like Philadelphia as we were in 1982, exactly the same size. For one reason or another, Philadelphia never became the magnet that Houston became for the urban growth of America in the 21st century. Here's a way to quickly envision this. This is Harris County in 1980. There are 1,328 census tracts in Harris County. And in blue were all the census tracts in 1980 that had majority Anglo populations. In red were the census tracts that were majority African American populations, the 3rd Ward and the 5th Ward. Along the ship channel in 1980 was the Segundo Barrio, we called it, where the Latinos were, and then a few places around the Beltway in that olive color with no majority. Here's here's what we look like in 2010. I cut out the middle parts. Isn't that incredible? No one consulted with me before all these people came. Here, suddenly Houston finds itself at the forefront of the demographic transformation occurring across all of America, nowhere more sharply articulated than in Houston, Texas. Here's why we make the claim that Houston is the most ethnically diverse the population in the country. How do you measure the ethnic diversity of a population? One way is just simply what's the percentage of Anglos, fewer Anglos, more diverse. A better way is what's called the entropy index. How close does a population come to equal force? 1/4 Asian, 1/4 Latino, 1/4 African American, 1/4 Anglo. And by that measure, the greater Houston metropolitan area just beats out New York. Here are the other 7 most diverse metro areas in the country. All the successful cities in America have been successful in large part because they have been magnets for the new immigration of the last 35 years. But Los Angeles has too few African Americans. Chicago has too many Anglos. Miami has way too few Asians. Houston is where the 4 communities meet in greater balance, greater equality, all of us minorities. All of us called on to build something that has never existed before in human history, a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society made up of all the peoples, all the religions, all the ethnicities of the world gathered together in one remarkable place. It is the story of Houston in the 21st century. Whether we would have chosen it or not, this is our destiny. And it's really very interesting and unexpected to see this city at the forefront of what all of America will be. I'll show you those figures in just a second. And it's not just numbers, of course, it's also ages. So this brings me back to the baby boom generation we talked about earlier. So let's see, I've got babies on the left, I've got old people on the right. I've got 12 different age categories from under the age of 5 to 75 years old or older. And here, somewhat to my chagrin, is where the Anglos are in Harris County, Texas today. Ladies and gentlemen, the baby boom. It's not until you reach people in Harris County age 63 and older that the majority of folks are still Anglos. And at each younger age group, the percentage of Anglos plummets. The percentage of African Americans, Asians, and above all Latinos surges. Here's where everybody else is in Harris County, Texas today. So this is a powerful picture of Houston's present and future. Of everybody in Harris County, not HISD, not inner city Houston, but everybody in all of Harris County who are under the age of 20, who will be the workers and citizens and voters and taxpayers of Houston in the 21st century. Of everybody under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 9% are Asians, 21% of everybody under 20 in all of Harris County is Anglo. So 2 big points to make very quickly, right? Number 1, wow, 70% of everybody under 20 is African American, Latino. The 2 groups overwhelmingly the most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public school systems. It is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African American and Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult to envision a prosperous future for Houston. This is who we are and will be as the 21st century unfolds. And the other point to make is that this is a done deal. Close the borders, build your fence, close off America, round up those 10 million people who you think are here illegally and send them wherever you think they're supposed to go. Seal off this country so not another refugee or immigrant ever again will be allowed to come to America. 63-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. We can. We'll work on it every chance we get. You can go to the bank on this. No conceivable force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more African American, more Asian, more Latino, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. So the only question our generation's been given is, okay, how do we make this work? How do we ensure that this diversity becomes a tremendous asset that can be, as we position ourselves in the global economy, 2nd largest port in the country, the 16th largest port on the planet, the gateway to the global marketplace, and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart and becoming a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness in the global economy. Much depends on how this generation speaks to this remarkable convergence of the 2 forces that have transformed the 21st century before our eyes in our lifetimes. A new economy where education has become critical, and this demographic revolution. So I want to look at some of the attitude shifts that we've been watching, but before I do that, here's what America looks like. So here's the United States as a whole, the same pattern. Part of the story of our lifetimes is the aging of Anglos, but still an overwhelmingly Anglo country, right? With that same pattern. But 6 months after we got this data from the census, they announced, okay, all of our estimates now tell us of everybody across the entire country under the age of 9, age 8 and younger across America, the majority are now African American, Latino, and Asian. And they said, you want to know what America will look like in 2050? Let's assume no immigration. So we'll just go by those damn actuarial tables. Here's what they say America looks like in 2050. So this is very close to Houston today. It's actually almost identical to Texas today. All of America is going to look like Houston in about 25 years. We are there first. How we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, but for the American future. Here, for better or worse, is where the American future is going to be worked out. And it's what makes, I think, all of our commitments and involvements in our world today of transcendent significance. This is not just Houston's future we're talking about. This is the picture of what all of America will look like as the 21st century unfolds. And as I say, that's why I called the book that we just wrote, Prophetic City. This is where you can see the American future taking shape. So how are people responding? I'm going to go very quickly. I'm going to stop. I won't do the third theme, because I want to make sure we have time for questions and thoughts. We've been asking people identical questions over all these years. So here are just a few examples of the questions we asked in this year and from past years. Refugees who are in danger in their home countries should always be welcome in Houston. First asked that question in 2016, 64% said agreed with that. And we were surprised to see how, and then it went to 75 and 77% in this year's survey. We said, here's a 10-point scale where 1 means very unfavorable feelings and 10 means very favorable feelings. Where on this scale would you characterize your feelings about undocumented immigrants? And those giving ratings of 7 to 10 on that scale went from 24%, 31, 40, 41, 40, 49% in the survey this year. And then we said, using that same scale, how would you describe your feelings about Muslims or followers of Islam? 35 growing to 60%, a kind of a remarkable, consistent embrace of this diversity in Houston, a recognition this is who we are, and this is what makes my life so much richer than it would otherwise have been in this city. And here are questions we asked, showing only of US-born Anglos in Harris County, of questions we asked up until last year. We'll ask them again in 2021. Immigrants, do you think immigrants contribute more to the American economy than they take, or do they take more than they contribute? Moving back and forth because it's looking at just US-born Anglos, but pretty consistent increase from 30 to 48%. Do you think the increasing immigration into America today mostly strengthens American culture or mostly threatens American culture? And going again from 33 to 49%. And then here's one more. Do you think the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston brought about by immigration will eventually become a source of great strength for the city or a growing problem? And the percentage said it will be a source of great strength went from 59 to 70%. Consistent, powerful, not dramatic, but real. So the question is, what's causing that? Is it whites Anglos who are changing their minds about this diversity? Or is it cohort secession? Is it that younger Anglos are coming into the world with different views than older Anglos? And the answer is it's a little bit of both, but it's more cohort secession than anything else. Here's how we tested this. So we're looking not only at US-born Anglos in Harris County by date of birth, those born in the 1960s, the baby boom generation, those born in the 1970s, Gen X, and those born in the 1980s, the beginnings of the millennial revolution, millennial generation. Asking people these identical questions, and here's the figures when the respondents were all aged 25 to 35. Increasing immigration mostly strengthens American culture. Immigrants to the U.S. generally contribute more to the American economy than they take. The U.S. should admit more or the same number of legal immigrants in the next 10 years who were admitted in the last 10. This is what sociologists call a robust finding. However you ask the question, younger Anglos are answering the questions differently. And here's one other piece of evidence for this. This is a kind of fun question. We said, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who was not Anglo? And of Anglos under 40, 61% said, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed, I have. Here it is for Anglos, 40 to 60. And here it is for us older Anglos. I'm afraid the hearts are going to get a little smaller here. A powerful reminder that we older Anglos grew up in a different world. The world of the 1960s and 70s was a different place than the world of the 1990s and 2000s. There's a law of human nature that says what I am familiar with feels right and natural, what I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. Every question in our surveys that we ask of Anglos about support for diversity, about support for immigration, comfort with diversity, all those questions show this remarkable, consistent pattern, not with education, not with gender, but with age. Younger Anglos taking for granted what we older Anglos are still struggling to accept. So I always tell people, gotta be gentle with us old Anglos. This is a big change. All of us are moving in that direction, an embrace of this diversity, a recognition, this is who we are. We may not necessarily have chosen this ahead of time, but this is Houston, and our lives are incomparably enriched by the best restaurants on the planet that are here in this city, the tremendous diversity of festivals and fiestas, and watching this younger generation embracing even more heartily than all the rest of us this new reality. I think, can I keep going to the third theme, or should I stop here? The third theme is, of course, what do you think, Bill? You're still muted. Bill, I'm muted.
Okay, you can go another 10 minutes.
We can go, really? Okay, fantastic. So what's going to be the source of Houston's wealth in the 21st century? Houston's location in the East Texas oil fields that counted for everything in Houston's wealth in the 20th century, this is going to count for less and less, and eventually for zilch in the 21st century. What will be the source of Houston's wealth? It's going to have something to do with whether or not we are going to be able to navigate the energy transition to a low carbon future that is going to be, Houston either is going to have to lead that transition or get out of the way as the energy capital moves away from oil and gas into renewable energy sources. We have the greatest medical complex in the world. Houston needs to position itself as the third coast for the life sciences, along with San Francisco and Boston. We have, as I say, the major port, the gateway to this global marketplace. The source of wealth for Houston in the 21st century will have to do with attracting the best and the brightest people in America, working at the cutting edge of knowledge, able to put that knowledge into commercial ventures. The resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere. When suddenly quality of life issues, never important for Houston. In the 1970s, they used to say, who cares if it's ugly? So what if it smells? It's a smell of money. Come on down. Increasingly, a recognition if Houston's going to make, it's got to become a more beautiful, a more attractive, a healthier place. And Houston understands that. And this is just some examples of the remarkable transformations that we've been undertaking in the last 20 years to make Houston a much more attractive place than it was when oil was the story of Houston in the 20th century. Here's why we flood. This is of course the bayous. It's also a reminder of one of the transformative events in Houston's history. In 2012, the citizens of the city of Houston voted to tax ourselves $100 million to be matched by $130 million in private monies to take the 9 major bayous in Houston, bayous that were concretized in the cheapest possible way by the Army Corps of Engineers. That's what we did down here. No one thought of these as amenities of any value. 1970s and 80s, we said, just straighten out these creeks, concretize them, get the water out of here as fast. We voted to build 150 miles of linear parks along all 9 of the major bayous in Houston. And once the Bayou Greenways Initiative is completed, by the end of 2021, 65% of everybody who lives within the city limits of Houston will be within 1.5 miles of a bayou trail. Houston is going to become one of the greenest cities in America. That would have been inconceivable 15 years ago. This is a city self-consciously reinventing itself, repositioning itself for success in the 21st century. And one of the central challenges is, of course, our vulnerability to storms. And we've been asking these questions since Harvey. It's almost certain that the Houston area will experience more severe storms in the next 10 years compared to the past 10 years. Right after Harvey, 76, 75 last year, came back this year, 77% now said it's almost certain that the Houston area will experience more severe storms. We said, are you in favor or opposed to prohibiting any additional construction in areas of Houston that were repeatedly flooded? 71% dropping to 56%. We don't like government telling people what they can do on their property. And to our surprise, it came back up to 65%, 3 years after Harvey in our survey in February and March of 2020. And part of what's going on here is a sea change in the way we see the world. Here are two questions about global warming. Question said, how serious a threat do you think is climate change or global warming? Would you say it's a very serious problem, somewhat serious, or not much of a problem? The percent since 2010 saying the threat of climate change is a very serious problem for Houston went from 39 to 42 to 40 to 52 to 51% in the survey this year. And even more striking, we said, what do you think is the cause of climate change? Is it mainly caused by human activities or by normal climate cycles? And the presenters said it's caused by human activities for which we are responsible. It's not normal climate cycles. Has gone from 48 to 54 to 58 to 61 to 65. And then this year, 3 years after Harvey, 69%. The world is a different place. There's a sea change, as I say, in the way we, residents of Harris County, see the world and understand the new long-term reality of Houston's vulnerability to floods and the need for us to address these issues and reduce the carbon emissions that are the cause of global warming. Here's my last point. This is, by some measures, the most spread out, the least dense, the most automobile-dependent city in all of America. This is the city of Houston. Covers 600 square miles and contains a grand total of 2.2 million people. Do you know how big this 600 square miles is? You could put inside the city limits of Houston, Texas, simultaneously, I kid you not, the cities of Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Those 4 cities cover the same geographical space as the city of Houston, and they contain 5.5 million people. City of Houston contains 2 million. Then you go out to the greater Houston metropolitan area, the CMSA of Houston, that is the sort of metropolitan region of Houston, Texas. There are 9 counties. There they are. Here's Harris County. Here is Fort Bend County, by the way, Sugar Land, Missouri. Fort Bend County, I forgot to mention, we think is the most ethnically diverse county on the planet. Fort Bend County today is 21% Asian, 20% African American, 24% Latino, 33% Anglo. You can't get much closer to 1/4 than that. And meanwhile, Montgomery County is by some measures the 3rd most Republican county in America. So you've got this great variety of who we are in this spread out city. The greater Houston metropolitan area covers a geographical space of more than 10,000 square miles. That is almost as large as the entire state of Massachusetts, and considerably larger than the state of New Jersey. This is the blob that ate East Texas. Houston was built on a crummy little bayou, 50 miles from any natural barrier in any direction. No mountains, no forests, no rivers. A developer's dream, built by, for, and on behalf of the automobile, made possible by air conditioning. And we spread everywhere. And we've created a civilization totally predicated on the automobile. We've been asking people in our surveys, if you could live any way you wanted in Houston, what would you prefer? Here's the last figures I'm going to show you, and then we'll stop and open it to your thoughts. What kind of neighborhood would you like to live in? A single-family residential area, which is where most of us live, right? Or an area with a mix of developments, including homes, shops, and restaurants? And a consistently 50-50 split. And then what kind of home would you like to live in? A single family home with a big yard where you need to drive just about everywhere you want to go, or a smaller home in a more urbanized area within walking distance of shops and workplaces? And it's again a 50-50 split. So and what this tells us, I think, is not that that Houstonians are opposed to sprawl or opposed to big houses, or it's that we are a different folk today than we were when we all went out to the suburbs and built this sprawling metropolis in the 1960s and 1970s. In the 1970, the US Census found that 2/3 of all American families had children living at home. 2/3. You have children at home, they need to be out in the suburbs. Suburbs were just growing in the 70s. Big houses, large yards, still part of the baby boom. In 2010, the census found that only 1/3 of households had children at home. And they think that by 2020, when we complete the census count, only about 1 in every 4 households will have children at home. Whole bunches of us are empty nesters. The kids have grown up. I work downtown. I love the ballet and the symphony and the opera. Do I still want to have to drive 2 hours every day? Do I want to have to mow the lawn? Give me a choice, Houston. And we're trying to attract the millennial class, the creative class, these young, the sociologists talk about the millennial generation as the postponing generation. They seem to be in no rush to get married, to have babies, to turn us into grandparents. They don't want to be out in the suburbs. They want variety, diversity, bar hopping that only cities can provide. And the fastest growing age segment of the American population are men and women over the age of 80. That population is growing faster than any other population in the country as we live these incredibly long and healthy lives. And we have not seen anything yet. The baby boom, 76 million, turning 74 this year, moving rapidly into senior status. I tell people, I'm not sure I want all those 85-year-olds driving everywhere in Houston, Texas. So we are, in this as in so many other respects, in the process of reinventing ourselves. So let me, in conclusion, the surveys have documented significant changes over the years in response to these major issues that tell us we're a different folk today. We see the world differently today than we did 10 years or 20 years ago. New things are possible for us today that would not have been possible 10 or 15 years ago. The survey participants increasingly acknowledge now the need to improve the public schools, to address the rising inequalities, calling for initiatives to mitigate future storms, develop more walkable neighborhoods, clearly embracing Houston's burgeoning diversity, feeling more positive than ever before about the continuing immigration, about how we're changing, who we are, and about our unchosen but real mission in the 21st century to show all of America what it can be as all of America comes to look increasingly like us in Houston. So the question is, it remains to be seen whether Houston's business and civic leaders can build on these attitude changes to make the sustained commitments that will be needed for prosperity in this new era. As we face this triple whammy of a health pandemic, an economic shutdown, a collapse of oil prices that still have enormous impact on the Houston economy, it's good to be reminded of the way area residents have changed over these years and the broader concerns and their support for the longer term investments. Whether we will do it or not is still an open question. I end the book saying the jury is out for Houston and the jury is out for America. Much depends on how this generation of incredibly privileged people like us are prepared to make the investments to ensure that the next generation of Houstonians have the skills and opportunities to succeed that will be required in the 21st century. So I tell people, stay tuned. I'm going to go back in the field next year to be able to measure how much we have been changed by this pandemic and also how strong are still those views of what we need to do to position Houston for prosperity in the very different world of the 21st century.
Well,
Download the report, buy the book, and open to your questions. And thanks. So I'm such a.
I think we're going to have to pass on the questions.
Oh no.
No, that's all right.
Bill, I think we can take some questions for a few minutes. Yeah, because we're just going straight to people watching worship on their own. We're not trying to jump on another Zoom call.
Okay, great. But first of all, I want to say, you can all see why Steve Kreinberg has won so many teaching awards.
Look who's talking.
and also, it's in the newsletter, but he's requested that that you support your local news, your local news bookstore, and to buy the book, which I will answer some more questions that you might have through the our nearby Brazos bookstore.
Yes.
To us. All right, question. Let's see, who's got a hand up?
Yeah, let me move all this out.
I will ask you a question that you haven't talked about, and that's, are you still asking the question about the role that belief in the Bible and that religion plays in people's lives?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, well, every year we ask the question, which of these statements comes closest to your feelings about the Bible? The Bible is the actual word of God to be taken literally word for word. About 1/3 of us say that's my view. The Bible is the inspired word of God, but written by men and contains some human errors. That's where 60%, and then a very small number who say the Bible is an ancient book of history and legends. God had nothing to do with it. We remain a religious folk, but the percentage of Protestants has gone down, the percentage of Catholics has stayed pretty steady, and there's been a tripling in the percent, still very small, but a tripling of the percent saying they're Hindu, Muslim, or Buddhist. We are moving into, as I say, a kind of coming together of all the world's religions in Houston. But and being a fundamentalist in your views of the Bible is a powerful predictor, not surprisingly, of a whole range of different things, and there's been a decline in the percent who say that they're very. We ask, how important is religion in your life? Very important, somewhat important, or not very important. The percent saying it's not very important has gone down pretty significantly over the years, but there's been no change in the percent who say the Bible is the inspired word of God but written by men. So it's an interesting sort of, there's a rise of young people who feel no affiliation with a specific religion, but remain spiritual, remain committed to religious attitudes and perspectives. And so that's been interesting to watch. And religion is, as I say, a powerful predictor of how you see the world and what your views are about gay rights and abortion rights and issues of that sort of as well, of course.
I remember that when you did the first survey, and you may have the numbers wrong, but you said, can you believe this? Stephen, coming from the Northeast and from other parts of the world, can you believe that, let's say, a third or 40% of the people believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God? And I said, I can't believe it's that few.
Bill's job was to get me used to being in this strange world of Texas. My whole life was somewhere between Philadelphia and Boston. So I came for a couple of years to Rice, and then of course fell in love with Rice. And then I didn't like Houston that much when I first came, but that changed also as we watched this.
If you'll unmute, for Susan, you unmute and you can ask your question.
We got to unmute. Oh darn.
Okay. Hi,
Oh, there you
Steve.
go.
How are you?
Hi, Susan. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I have a question. What months are you actually in the field doing this? And obviously next year, regardless of when you're in the field, the pandemic will still be going on, I'm sure. So
Right.
Are you contemplating, you have to be, how that will affect your questions and what are you going to do with it?
Yes, thank you, Susan. Well, the last interview we conducted for the 2020 survey was on March 12th.
Oh,
It was on March 16th when the pandemic hit Houston, right? And they ordered all the bars and restaurants closed. So we have a full year of this experience. We're going to go back in the field in February and early March of 2021, asking some of these identical questions. And we'll really be able to measure in a systematic way, how has this affected us? In what views? And some are obvious. I mean, in the survey this year, we asked people, hey, how would you rate job opportunities in Houston? Excellent, good, fair, or poor? 69% in the survey of 2020 said job opportunities in Houston are excellent or good. It's not going to be that high when we come back in February of this year. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And it's the 40th year of these surveys. I tell people I was a very young man when we started, as was Bill. And who knew that this would turn out to be the most interesting city in America? I mean, it's just never occurred to me that I was going to spend my life studying Houston. That one-time survey, and so this year is going to be particularly interesting, and I'll be interested. We'll obviously let you know. You have to invite me back, and after I think we'll probably release the findings in May of 2021, and then I'll be free to talk about it with everybody and bring copies of the findings. It's going to be interesting to see.
I will say that while we both grew older, I'm the one who looks like it.
Yeah. That's good.
We just thank you so much. It's been a great treat, and I think a lot of people will want to see the book. And you got a good crowd for our bunch.
Yes, I appreciate this very much. Thanks so much. I'm a great fan of Covenant Church, so
Thank
it's
you.
an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you and a great delight.